I'll never forget the moment my daughter Emily looked me in the eyes and said those words. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, the kind where the sun feels like it's trying to make everything right in the world. We were standing in her pristine living room, the one I'd helped her furnish when she and her fiancé, Mark, moved into their fancy new house. The air smelled faintly of lavender from the candles she always lit for guests, and I could hear the faint hum of music from the backyard where they were planning her wedding reception. I'd driven 3 hours to be there, my old pickup rattling the whole way, just to drop off the heirloom necklace I'd promised her, the one my mother wore at her wedding, the one I'd worn at mine. I thought it would mean something to her. I thought it would mean everything. "Dad," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "you're too poor to be at my wedding." I stood there, the velvet box with the necklace still in my hands, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. My little girl, the one I'd raised alone after her mother passed, the one I'd worked double shifts at the factory to put through college, she was standing there in her designer dress, her manicured nails tapping on the marble counter, telling me I didn't belong. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat felt like it was stuffed with cotton. I just stared at her, the necklace box trembling in my grip, and she didn't even flinch. Her eyes were cold, like she was looking at a stranger. "You don't understand, Dad," she went on, her voice softer now but no less cruel. "This wedding is important. Mark's family is coming, his colleagues, people from his firm. It's a big deal, and we need it to look a certain way. You showing up in your work boots and that old jacket, it's not the vibe we're going for." I looked down at myself. My boots were scuffed, sure, but I'd polished them that morning. My jacket was old, but it was clean, pressed even. I'd spent an hour getting ready, thinking I was doing this for her. I'd even stopped at a gas station halfway to check my reflection in the bathroom mirror, making sure I looked presentable for my daughter's big day. And now here she was, telling me I was an embarrassment. I wanted to ask her how it had come to this. How the girl who used to climb onto my lap and beg for stories about her mom had turned into this woman who couldn't stand the sight of me. But before I could find the words, Mark walked in. He was all polished shoes and tailored suits, his hair slicked back like he'd stepped out of a magazine. He gave me a quick glance, the kind you'd give a delivery guy who'd overstayed his welcome, and then he put his arm around Emily. "Babe," he said, not even looking at me, "is everything okay?" She sighed like I was some problem she had to solve. "It's fine. Dad was just leaving, like I was a guest who'd wandered into the wrong house." I felt my chest tighten, a dull ache spreading like wildfire. I'd spent years building a life for her, sacrificing my own dreams, my own comfort, my own everything. I'd skipped meals so she could have new shoes for school. I'd worked nights so she could go to dance classes. I'd sold my father's old watch, the one thing I had left of him, to pay for her senior trip to Europe. And now, I was being dismissed like I was nothing. I set the necklace box on the counter, the soft thud of it louder than anything else in the room. "This was for you," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I thought you'd want it." Emily glanced at the box, then back at me. For a second, I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes, guilt maybe, or a memory of who we used to be. But then she shrugged. "Thanks, Dad, but I've already got my jewelry picked out, something a bit more modern." Mark chuckled, a low, condescending sound that made my skin crawl. "Yeah, we're going for a specific aesthetic," he said, finally looking at me. "You get it, right? It's nothing personal. Nothing personal." Those words echoed in my head as I walked back to my truck, the gravel crunching under my boots. The sun was still shining, but it felt colder now, like the world had shifted in those few minutes. I climbed into the driver's seat, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. I didn't cry, not then. I just sat there, staring at the dashboard, trying to make sense of it all. How had my daughter become this person? How had I become the man she was ashamed of? I thought about driving away and never looking back. I thought about calling her, begging her to explain, to tell me what I'd done wrong. But instead, I pulled out my phone. It was an old model, cracked screen and all, but it still worked. I opened my banking app, the one I hadn't checked in weeks because I'd been too busy scraping by. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I just needed something to ground me, something to remind me I was still here, still real. The screen loaded slowly, the numbers flickering into view, and I froze. I don't want to get ahead of myself here, because that moment wasn't the end of it, it was just the beginning. But as I sat in my truck, staring at that screen, something shifted inside me. It wasn't just about the money, not yet. It was about the years I'd given her, the love I'd poured into her, the life I'd built brick by brick only to have it torn down in a single conversation. I wasn't going to let that be the end of my story. I started the engine, the old truck coughing to life, and pulled out of her driveway. The necklace was still on her counter, forgotten, just like me. But as I drove away, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Emily thought she knew who I was. She thought she could write me off, cast me aside like some old relic that didn't fit her shiny new life. But she didn't know everything, not by a long shot. As the miles stretched out in front of me, I started thinking about the past, not just the good times, but the hard ones, the ones I'd shielded her from. The late nights at the factory, the bills I'd paid in secret, the dreams I'd buried so she could chase hers. I thought about the promises I'd made to myself, to her mother. And I thought about that banking app, the numbers staring back at me like a quiet reminder of something I'd almost forgotten. I wasn't done yet, not even close. The drive back home felt like it took years. The road stretched out in front of my old pickup, each mile marker a reminder of Emily's words slicing through me like a dull knife. "You're too poor to be at my wedding." I kept replaying that moment in her living room, the way her eyes didn't even meet mine when she said it, the way Mark's smirk seemed to seal my fate. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white, and the hum of the engine was the only thing keeping me from losing it entirely. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't want music. I wanted to sit with the hurt, to let it burn, because maybe then I could figure out where it all went wrong. By the time I pulled into the gravel lot outside my small house, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in shades of orange that felt too beautiful for how ugly I felt inside. My place wasn't much a single story with peeling paint, a porch that sagged on one side, and a yard that hadn't seen a mower in weeks. But it was mine. I'd paid for every shingle, every nail, with sweat and overtime. I'd kept it after Emily's mom passed, because I couldn't bear to let go of the place where we'd raised her, where we'd laughed and cried and built a life. Now, standing on that creaky porch, I wondered if I'd been clinging to a memory that didn't even exist anymore. Inside, the house was quiet, too quiet. I dropped my keys on the kitchen table, the clink echoing in the empty space. There were still traces of Emily everywhere, a photo of her at her high school graduation on the fridge, a chipped mug she used to love drinking hot chocolate from. I sat down heavily in my old recliner, the springs groaning under my weight, and let my head fall into my hands. I kept thinking about that necklace I'd left on her counter. It wasn't just jewelry. It was my mother's, then mine, a piece of our family's history. I'd spent weeks polishing it, imagining her face lighting up when she saw it. Instead, she'd dismissed it like it was junk, like I was junk. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Emily. My heart jumped for a split second, hoping maybe she'd reconsidered, maybe she'd apologize. But when I opened it, all it said was, "Dad, please don't call or come by. I need space to focus on the wedding. Thanks. Thanks." Like I was a coworker she was brushing off, not the man who'd raised her. I stared at the screen until it blurred, not because I was crying, I wasn't ready for that yet, but because I couldn't believe this was real. My daughter, my only child, was pushing me out of her life because I didn't fit her new world. I didn't reply. What could I say? Instead, I went about my day, trying to keep busy. I mowed the lawn, fixed a leaky faucet, even scrubbed the kitchen counter until it gleamed. But every task felt hollow, like I was just going through the motions. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from an old friend, Tom, who'd worked with me at the factory before he moved into real estate. He'd been checking in on me ever since Emily moved out, always saying I should sell the house and start fresh. I hadn't listened before, but now, with Emily's words still ringing in my ears, I let him talk. "Listen, John," he said, his voice warm but insistent. "I know you love that place, but you're sitting on something valuable. The market's hot right now. You could cash out, move somewhere new, live a little. You don't need to stay tied to that house, just because of memories. I mumbled something about thinking it over, but my mind was elsewhere. Valuable. That word stuck with me. I hadn't told Tom or anyone about the account I'd checked in my truck the day before. It wasn't something I talked about, not even with Emily. After her mom died, I'd started putting a little money aside, bit by bit, from every paycheck. It was my safety net, my way of making sure we'd never lose everything. I'd never touched it, not even when times got tight. I wanted to believe I was saving it for Emily, for her future, but now I wasn't so sure. That evening, I got another blow. Emily's best friend, Sarah, who I'd always thought of as a second daughter, posted pictures on social media from a wedding planning party at Emily's house. There they were, Emily, Mark, his parents, all smiling with champagne flutes in their hands, the backyard decked out with fairy lights and flowers. I scrolled through the photos, my chest tightening with every swipe. There was the counter where I'd left the necklace, now covered with platters of food. There was the spot where I'd stood when Emily told me I wasn't welcome. And there was Mark, laughing with his arm around her, like he'd already replaced me as the man in her life. I don't know what hurt more, the fact that she was celebrating without me, or the fact that she looked so happy doing it. I kept scrolling, torturing myself, until I saw a comment from Mark's mother. "So proud of our kids for pulling this off. It's going to be the event of the year, the event of the year." My daughter's wedding, and I was nothing but a footnote, an inconvenience to be swept aside. I shut off my phone and walked out to the porch, the night air cool against my skin. I sat on the steps, staring at the stars, and let my mind drift back to the years I'd given everything for her. I remembered the nights I'd come home from the factory, my hands aching from the machinery, to find her asleep on the couch with her school books scattered around her. I'd carry her to bed, tucking her in even when she was too old for it, because I wanted her to feel safe. I remembered the time I stayed up until dawn sewing a tear in her prom dress because she was too embarrassed to wear it otherwise. I'd done it all without a second thought because she was my world, and now I was nothing to her, a liability, a man in worn boots who didn't belong in her perfect picture. I thought about calling Tom back, telling him to start the paperwork to sell the house. I thought about that bank account again, the numbers I'd seen but hadn't fully processed. I thought about the life I'd put on hold for her, the dreams I'd let slip away. And for the first time in years, I started to wonder if maybe it wasn't too late for me to take something back. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. But as I sat there, the stars bright overhead, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, not yet, but resolve. Emily thought she could erase me from her life, but she didn't know the whole story, not yet. The days blurred together after that night on the porch. I went through the motions, work at the factory, dinner alone, the hum of the television, filling the silence of my house. But Emily's words kept echoing in my head, sharp and relentless. "You're too poor to be at my wedding." Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing there, her voice so cold, Mark's smug grin burning into me. I tried to push it down, to tell myself she didn't mean it, that she was just caught up in the wedding frenzy. But then came the moment that broke something inside me, something I didn't even know was still whole. It was a Thursday, about a week after I'd left the necklace at her house. I was at the factory, my hands greasy from the machinery, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I wiped my fingers on a rag and checked it, expecting maybe a bill reminder or a message from Tom about the house. Instead, it was an email from Emily. No greeting, no warmth, just a single line. "Dad, we need to talk about the house. Can you come by this weekend?" My stomach twisted. The house, my house. The one I'd paid off with years of overtime, the one I'd kept standing through every storm, literal and otherwise. What did she want with it now? I should have said no. I should have told her to call me if it was so important. But despite everything, she was still my daughter. I couldn't shake the hope that maybe, just maybe, she wanted to fix things. So, I agreed. That Saturday, I drove the 3 hours back to her place, the necklace incident still raw in my mind. I didn't bring anything this time, no gifts, no heirlooms, just myself. Maybe that was my first mistake. When I pulled into her driveway, I noticed another car parked there, a sleek black SUV, the kind that cost more than I make in a year. The front door was ajar, and I could hear voices inside, loud and carefree, like a party was in full swing. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorbell. I didn't want to walk into another scene where I wasn't welcome, but Emily had asked me to come. I knocked lightly and stepped inside. The living room was packed. Mark's parents were there, along with a handful of people I didn't recognize, probably his colleagues or friends from their shiny new social circle. Emily was in the center holding a glass of wine, laughing at something Mark said. The necklace I'd left wasn't anywhere in sight, not on her, not on the counter. The room felt like a different world, one I wasn't invited to. When Emily saw me, her smile faltered for a split second before she plastered it back on. "Dad," she said, her voice loud enough to carry over the chatter, "you made it." Everyone turned to look at me. I felt their eyes sizing me up, my work boots, my faded jacket, my calloused hands. Mark's mother, Linda, gave me a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. His father, Richard, didn't bother looking up from his phone. I stood there, feeling like I'd walked into a courtroom instead of my daughter's house. Emily gestured for me to follow her to the kitchen, away from the crowd. I thought maybe she wanted a private moment, a chance to talk like we used to. But when we got there, Mark was waiting, leaning against the counter with a folder in his hand. The air felt heavy, like I was about to walk into a trap. "Dad," Emily started, her tone all business, "we've been talking, and we think it's time for you to move on." I blinked, not sure I'd heard her right. "Move on?" She glanced at Mark, who nodded like they'd rehearsed this. "The house," she said, folding her arms. "It's too big for you now, don't you think? You're alone, and it's just not practical. Mark and I could use the money to start our life together. We'd sell it, split the profits. It's only fair." Fair. The word hit me like a punch. I'd poured my life into that house, into her. I'd stayed up nights fixing leaks, painting walls, making it a home for her to grow up in. And now she was standing there, asking me to hand it over like it was nothing, like it was just a line item on her wedding budget. I opened my mouth to argue, but Mark cut in, his voice smooth and patronizing. "Look, John, we're not trying to be harsh, but let's be real, you're not getting any younger. Maintaining a house like that, it's a burden. We're thinking of you here. You could move into a nice little apartment, something easier. We'd handle everything." I looked from him to Emily, waiting for her to say something, to tell me this wasn't what it sounded like. But she just stood there nodding along, her eyes fixed on the floor. That's when it hit me she wasn't just asking me to sell the house. She was trying to erase me, to strip away the last piece of who I was so she could have her perfect life with her perfect husband. "Emily," I said, my voice low, "this is my home, our home. Your mom and I." "Mom's gone, Dad," she snapped, cutting me off. Her voice was sharp, louder than it needed to be, and I realized the chatter in the living room had gone quiet. They were listening. "And I'm starting a new life. I can't keep carrying the past around. You shouldn't either." I felt my face burn, not with anger, but with shame. The kind of shame that comes from being called out in front of strangers, from being told you're not wanted by the one person you thought would always need you. I glanced toward the living room, where Linda was whispering something to Richard, both of them smirking. Mark's friends were pretending not to hear, but their eyes flicked toward me, curious, pitying. I could have yelled. I could have told them all what I'd sacrificed, how I'd given up everything for Emily. But instead, I did something I didn't expect. I smiled, just a small one, barely noticeable, but it was there. I don't know why. Maybe it was the weight of it all. Maybe it was the absurdity of standing in my daughter's kitchen, being told to give up my home by a man who thought he owned the world. But that smile felt like a shield, like I was holding on to something they couldn't touch. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice steady, almost calm. Emily looked surprised, like she'd expected me to beg or fight. Mark raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Good," he said, sliding the folder toward me. "We've got some papers drawn up, just preliminary stuff. Take a look." I didn't touch the folder. I just nodded, turned, and walked out. The eyes followed me, the whispers trailing behind like smoke. As I stepped onto the porch, the cool air hit my face, and I felt that spark from the other night flare up again. I pulled out my phone, opened the banking app, and stared at the numbers again. They hadn't changed. They were real. And as I got into my truck, I made a call not to Tom, not to Emily, but to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Someone who might just change everything. The drive back from Emily's house was different this time. The road was the same, the familiar hum of my truck's engine unchanged. But something inside me had shifted. That folder Mark had slid across the counter sat on the passenger seat, unopened, like a ticking bomb I refused to touch. I could still see Emily's face, the way she'd avoided my eyes when she asked me to sell the house, the way Mark had spoken to me like I was some old fool who didn't know better. Their words, their smugness, their certainty that I was nothing at all burned, but not the way it had before. This time, the fire felt like it was fueling me, pushing me towards something I'd been too tired, too broken to face until now. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I pulled into a diner just off the highway, one of those places with flickering neon signs and coffee that tastes like it's been brewing since the 92nd. I needed to think, to breathe, away from the ghosts of my house and the weight of Emily's betrayal. The waitress, a woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Doris, poured me a cup without asking and left me alone at the counter. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I'd called as I left Emily's place. It was a long shot, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. But if anyone could help me make sense of this mess, it was him. John, the voice on the other end said, warm but cautious. "It's been a while. You okay?" It was Paul, my old friend from college, who'd gone on to become a lawyer, a good one, from what I'd heard. We'd lost touch after Emily's mom passed, but I'd always trusted him. I told him everything. Emily's words, Mark's arrogance, the folder, the house. I told him about the necklace, about the party I wasn't invited to, about the way they'd looked at me like I was dirt under their shoes. And then, almost as an afterthought, I told him about the banking app, the numbers I'd seen, the account I'd kept hidden even from myself for so long. Paul listened quietly, the way he always did, and when I finished, he let out a low whistle. "You've been sitting on that kind of money all this time?" he asked, not judgmental, just surprised. "John, do you know what this means? You're not just some factory worker they can push around. You've got options. You've got power. Power." The word felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. I'd spent so long being Emily's dad, the guy who worked overtime, who fixed leaks and paid bills, that I'd forgotten I could be anything else. But Paul's words lit something up inside me, a flicker of the man I used to be before life wore me down. He told me to meet him the next day, to bring any documents I had about the house, the account, anything that might matter. "Don't sign anything they give you," he warned. "Not until we talk." I spent the rest of that night in my house, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow on the walls, reminded me of Emily growing up, her laughter, her tantrums, the way she'd hug me after a bad day. I walked into her old room, now just a storage space for boxes and memories, and sat on the edge of the bed. I thought about the nights I'd stayed up helping her with homework, the mornings I'd driven her to school when the bus broke down. I thought about the time I sold my old guitar, the one I used to play for her mom, to pay for her braces. All those sacrifices, and for what? So she could stand in her fancy kitchen and tell me to give up the last thing I had left. The next morning I met Paul at his office, a small but tidy place downtown with bookshelves lined with legal texts and a view of the street below. He looked older than I remembered, his hair graying at the temples, but his handshake was firm, his eyes sharp. I handed him the folder from Emily and Mark, still unopened, and he flipped through it with a frown that deepened with every page. "This is a joke," he said finally, tossing the folder onto his desk. "They're trying to get you to sign over the house for a fraction of its value. Did you know it's in your name alone? They can't touch it unless you agree." I nodded, my throat tight. I'd always known the house was mine, but hearing it out loud felt different. It was a piece of me they couldn't take, no matter how hard they tried. Paul leaned back in his chair, studying me. "There's more," he said. "That account you mentioned, I did some digging. It's not just a savings account, John. It's tied to an old investment your dad set up years ago. It's grown more than you realize. You're not rich, not in the way Mark and his family are, but you're not the poor man your daughter thinks you are." I sat there, stunned, as he slid a piece of paper across the desk with numbers that made my head spin. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to change things. Enough to mean I didn't have to bow to anyone. I thought about Emily's wedding, the one I wasn't invited to, the one they thought I was too embarrassing to attend. I thought about Mark's smirk, Linda's whispers, the way they'd all looked at me like I was nothing. And then I thought about that folder, sitting on Paul's desk like a challenge. "I want to go to the wedding," I said suddenly, the words surprising even me. Paul raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that, after what they said?" I nodded, a plan forming in my mind, though I wasn't ready to say it out loud. "I'm her father. I deserve to be there." Paul smiled, a glint in his eye that told me he understood more than I was saying. "All right," he said. "Let's make sure you show up in style." The next few days were a blur. Paul helped me pull together documents, make calls, and get things in order. I didn't tell Emily or Mark I was coming. I didn't need to. When the day of the wedding arrived, I didn't show up in my work boots or my old jacket. I wore a suit Paul had helped me pick out, sharp and tailored, the kind of thing I hadn't worn in years. I drove to the venue, a sprawling estate with manicured lawns and chandeliers glittering through the windows. I parked my truck a little ways down the road, not wanting to draw attention, not yet. When I walked into the reception hall, the music was loud, the laughter louder. Emily was there, radiant in her white dress, Mark beside her, both of them oblivious to me standing in the doorway. I caught Linda's eye first, her smile freezing as she recognized me. Then Mark saw me, his brow furrowing like I was a problem he hadn't planned for. Emily turned last, her face going pale as I stepped forward, my head held high. "Dad?" she said, her voice barely audible over the music. "What are you doing here?" I smiled, that same calm smile I'd found in her kitchen. "I'm here for my daughter's wedding," I said, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "And I brought something you might want to see." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single piece of paper, not the folder they'd given me, but something else, something Paul had prepared. I handed it to Emily, watching as her eyes scanned it, then widened in disbelief. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what came next. The air in the reception hall felt like it had thickened, every eye on me as Emily clutched the paper I'd handed her. Her hands trembled, the crisp white of her wedding dress, a stark contrast to the flush creeping up her neck. Mark leaned over her shoulder, his confident smirk faltering as he read the document. The music still played, some upbeat pop song that felt absurdly out of place, but the chatter around us had died down. Guests were watching, whispering, their champagne flutes forgotten in their hands. I stood there, my suit crisp, my posture steady, and for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just Emily's dad, the tired factory worker in scuffed boots. I was John, a man who'd been pushed too far and wasn't backing down. "Dad, what is this?" Emily's voice was sharp, almost accusing, but there was a crack in it, a hint of panic she couldn't hide. I didn't answer right away. I let the moment stretch, let her feel the weight of it, the way I'd felt the weight of her words in her kitchen. The paper wasn't anything dramatic, not a movie-style bombshell, but it was enough. It was a copy of the deed to my house, the one she and Mark had so casually demanded I sell. But there was something else on it, something Paul had uncovered when we went through the records, a clause, clear as day, stating that the property was mine alone, untouchable, without my consent. And below that, a valuation Paul had gotten from a real estate contact, showing the house was worth far more than the pittance Mark's preliminary papers had offered. "It's the truth," I said, my voice calm, but carrying across the room. "That house you want to sell, it's mine, always has been, and it's worth more than you think, more than you ever bothered to ask about." Mark's face twisted, a mix of confusion and irritation. "This is ridiculous," he said, stepping forward like he could intimidate me into silence. "John, this isn't the time or place. You're embarrassing yourself." I didn't flinch. I looked him dead in the eye, the way I used to look at foremen who tried to short my hours at the factory. "Embarrassing myself?" I said, letting my voice rise just enough to make the nearby guests lean in. "You stood in my daughter's kitchen and told me to give up my home. You laughed at me, called me a burden, and now you're telling me I'm the embarrassment? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Linda, Mark's mother, set her glass down with a clink, her lips pursed tight. Richard, his father, finally looked up from his phone, his brow furrowed like he was just now realizing something was wrong. Emily's eyes darted between me and Mark, her perfect wedding unraveling in front of her carefully curated guests. "Dad, please," she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "Let's talk about this later. This is my day." "Your day," I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. I took a step closer, not aggressive, but steady, like I was claiming ground I'd lost. "I spent my life making sure you had days like this, Emily. I worked nights so you could have dresses like that one. I sold things I loved so you could go to college, travel, live the life you wanted. And you thanked me by telling me I'm too poor to be here." Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't sure if they were for me or for the scene she was losing control of. Mark put a hand on her arm, like he was trying to steer her away, but she didn't move. The paper in her hand crumpled slightly as her grip tightened. "John," Mark said, his tone sharp now, "you're out of line. This is a private matter. You can't just show up and—" "Private?" I cut him off, my voice steady but loud enough to carry. "You made it public when you laughed at me in front of your friends. When you told me I didn't fit your aesthetic. When you thought you could take my home because you assumed I had nothing left to give." I reached into my jacket pocket again, pulling out another document Paul had prepared. This one was simpler, just a single page, but it felt heavier than the deed. It was a statement from my bank, showing the balance of that account I'd checked in my truck weeks ago. I hadn't touched it in years, hadn't even realized how much it had grown until Paul dug into it. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to make Mark's jaw drop when I held it up. "You thought I was poor," I said, looking straight at Emily now. "You thought I was nothing. But you never asked, did you? You never cared enough to find out who I really am." The room was dead silent now, the music the only sound, tinny and distant. Emily's tears spilled over, streaking her makeup, but she didn't say a word. Mark snatched the bank statement from my hand, his eyes scanning it, his face paling as the numbers sank in. He opened his mouth, then closed it, like a fish gasping for air. For once he had nothing to say. Linda stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "This is absurd," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "If you had this kind of money, why are you living like that?" She gestured at me, her eyes raking over my suit like it was still the old jacket she'd sneered at. I smiled, that same calm smile I'd found in Emily's kitchen. "Because I didn't live for money," I said. "I lived for her." I nodded toward Emily, who was staring at the floor, her shoulders shaking. But I guess that wasn't enough. I turned to leave, the weight of the moment settling over me. I'd said what I needed to say. I'd shown them who I was, not the broken old man they'd written off, but someone with more than they'd ever given me credit for. As I walked toward the door, I heard Emily call after me, her voice choked with sobs. "Dad, wait, please." I paused, my hand on the doorframe, but I didn't turn around. "You made your choice, Emily," I said quietly. "You wanted a life without me. Now you've got it." I stepped out into the cool evening air, the sounds of the reception fading behind me. My truck was waiting where I'd parked it, unassuming but mine, just like the house, just like the life I'd built. I didn't look back, didn't need to. I'd spent years carrying the weight of their expectations, their dismissals, their betrayals. Now, for the first time in a long time, I felt light. As I drove away, I thought about Paul's words. "You've got power." I wasn't sure what I'd do next. Sell the house, start over, maybe even leave this town behind. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let them define me anymore. Emily and Mark could have their wedding, their guests, their perfect life, but they'd learn soon enough that every choice has a price. The engine of my truck rumbled as I drove away from the wedding venue, the glittering lights of the estate fading in my rearview mirror. The night was quiet, save for the hum of the tires on the road, and for the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel like it was being crushed. Emily's tearful plea echoed in my mind. "Dad, wait, please." But I didn't turn back. I couldn't, not after everything. I'd given her my heart, my years, my everything, and she'd thrown it away for a life that didn't include me. Now, it was time to find a life that was mine. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove to a small motel just outside town, the kind with flickering vacancy signs and vending machines that only take quarters. I checked in, dropped my bag on the lumpy bed, and sat by the window staring out at the empty parking lot. The suit I'd worn to the wedding hung neatly in the closet, a reminder of the man I'd shown them all I could be. But as I sat there, the weight of the day settling over me, I realized I didn't need the suit to prove anything. Not anymore. The next morning I called Paul. His voice was steady, grounding, like it always was. "You did good, John," he said when I told him what happened at the wedding. "You showed them you're not invisible. Now what? Now what?" That question hung in the air, heavy with possibility. I'd spent so long defining myself as Emily's father, as the man who sacrificed everything for her, that I'd forgotten what it meant to live for myself. But those numbers in my bank account, the deed to my house, the years I'd spent building something solid, they weren't just for her, they were mine too. And I was done letting other people decide what they were worth. "I'm thinking about selling the house," I told Paul, the words surprising me even as I said them. "Not for Emily, not for Mark, for me." He didn't hesitate. "Good call. You've got enough in that account to start fresh, John. Anywhere you want. What's the plan?" I didn't have an answer yet, but the idea of a clean slate felt like a breath of fresh air. I pictured a small place by the coast, somewhere with salt in the air and waves to drown out the noise in my head. Or maybe a cabin in the mountains, where I could wake up to nothing but the sound of wind through the trees. I'd always loved working with my hands. Maybe I'd fix up a place, make it my own, without anyone telling me it wasn't good enough. Over the next few weeks, things moved fast. Paul connected me with a real estate agent, not Tom, but someone new, someone who didn't know my history and didn't need to. The house sold for more than I'd expected, more than Mark's preliminary papers had dared to offer. I didn't tell Emily or Mark. They didn't need to know. The money went into my account, alongside the savings I'd built up over the years, the ones I'd hidden even from myself. It wasn't a fortune, but it was freedom. I heard through Sarah, Emily's friend, that the wedding had unraveled after I left. Not in a dramatic, chairs thrown across the room way, but in the quiet, uncomfortable way that happens when truth hangs in the air. Guests had whispered about the scene, about the father who'd shown up with a deed and a bank statement, about the bride who'd cried through her own reception. Mark's parents, Linda and Richard, had left early, their perfect image tarnished. Emily had tried calling me a few times, leaving voicemails I didn't listen to. I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. I packed up the essentials, some clothes, a few photos, the chipped mug Emily used to love, and left the rest behind. The house wasn't home anymore. It was just a shell of memories I didn't want to carry. I donated most of it to a local charity, including the necklace I'd left at Emily's. If she didn't want it, someone else would. Someone who'd see its value, not just in dollars, but in the history it held. I ended up in a small coastal town a few hours away, a place where the air smelled of salt and the people didn't ask too many questions. I rented a modest house with a porch overlooking the ocean. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I spent my days fixing it up, painting the walls, sanding the floors, planting a small garden out back. I even bought a new guitar, something I hadn't played since Emily was a kid. At night, I'd sit on the porch, strumming old songs, letting the music fill the spaces her absence had left. I thought about Emily every day, but not with the same pain as before. It was a quieter ache, the kind that comes with accepting what you can't change. I didn't hate her. I couldn't. She was still my daughter, even if she'd chosen a path that didn't include me. But I wasn't going to let her choices define me anymore. I'd given her everything I had, and she'd thrown it back in my face. That was her loss, not mine. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I got a letter. Not an email, not a text, but an actual handwritten letter, the kind nobody sends anymore. It was from Sarah, Emily's friend. She wrote that Emily was struggling, that the marriage wasn't what she'd expected, that Mark's family had turned cold after the wedding. She didn't ask for anything, didn't beg me to come back. She just wanted me to know Emily was hurting, and maybe, in her own way, she was sorry. I folded the letter and set it on the table, next to my coffee mug. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. Emily had made her choices, and I'd made mine. I wasn't the man she'd dismissed, the one she thought was too poor to matter. I was John, a man with a home by the sea, a guitar in his hands, and a life that was finally his own. As I sat on my porch, the waves crashing softly in the distance, I realized something. Family isn't just blood. It's loyalty, respect, the people who see you for who you are, not what they want you to be. I'd spent years thinking I had to earn Emily's love, that my sacrifices were the price of her happiness. But love isn't a debt you owe forever. It's a gift, and when it's thrown away, you don't beg for it back. You move on. I don't know what Emily's doing now, and maybe I never will. But I know I'm here, watching the sunset, feeling the salt air on my skin, and for the first time in years, I'm not carrying anyone else's weight. Betrayal has a price, and I'd paid enough. Now, it was their turn to learn that lesson.